seasoned travelers gather to discuss topics and issues that affect our lives. The far side is not only a place, but a condition. It exists at the furthest reaches of the planet and at the edge of credulity. It is on the outskirts of the twilight zone and beckons to those with open and inquisitive minds. Stand by for transmission from the far side. Howdy, howdy, friends and neighbors. This is your old pal B coming to you from deep in the jungles of Borneo. Welcome back. We're happy you could join us for another tour of the far side. Around here, we don't think outside the box because we never started inside of one. We don't limit our inquiry to the mainstream, but go far outside the bounds of normal and standard. We hope you'll click into Radio Farsight's companion blog at alganguy.blogspot.com. There you'll find additional information for today's interview, as well as over 400 articles on dozens of topics that explore the strange and weird universe we inhabit. If you appreciate our work, you'll find a PayPal donate button on the blog. We prefer to avoid advertising and instead let listeners and readers directly show their support. Today is really exciting. We're about to talk with Dr. Courtney Brown. Dr. Brown is a mathematician and social scientist teaching in the Department of Political Science at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Outside of the university, he is the leading scholar on the subject of remote viewing, using procedures developed by the U.S. military for espionage, as well as other procedures derived from those methodologies. Through the magic of the Internet, Dr. Brown joins us from Georgia, USA. Courtney, hi. Thank you for joining us here on Radio Farside.
Bernard, it's my great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you very much for that. We're extremely interested in the information you have to present tonight. Part of it is because remote viewing is one of those topics that just seems like really, really out there, really strange. And from what I've been reading about your work, it seems to bring it down to earth and make it a little more accessible. And so I'm hoping tonight that you can give us some insight into remote viewing. Actually, you call it non-physical perception, right?
Yeah. It's in fact, that's part of the title of my book, Remote Viewing: The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception. So that's exactly what it is. And I can explain a little bit. Maybe we should start out with me explaining a little bit about what remote viewing is.
Absolutely, that would be great.
Well, remote viewing, it's a mental procedure. So it's done with the mind, and it's done in a room, usually by yourself, with a stack of paper and a pen. And the people who do it that I work with are highly trained, and they use mental procedures that were developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes. And the official program of the U.S. military for remote viewing was terminated in November of 1995. However, many people, including myself, are absolutely 100% certain that the U.S. military has a much bigger remote viewing project going on now. When they declassified it, they knew it was going to come out. They shut it down, said it was basically a mistake, sorry, oops. And then I'm sure they just simply started up a new project. And if that ever comes out public, they'll say, oh my gosh, sorry, it was a mistake, shut it down, and then start up a brand new project. That's just how they work. But remote viewing is a procedure that involves a lot of steps. Now, in the old days, people used to call things like this psychic, but we don't do that anymore because this particular set of procedures are very highly structured, and we now know the science of why it works. But to give you an idea of what it feels like before I explain why it works, what it feels like is very interesting. Let's say your eyes are open now, you're looking at your radio or your computer screen or your table or your room. And while your eyes are open, it's done in the normal waking state of consciousness. There's no altered state, no hypnosis, no anything like that. And while your eyes are open right now, imagine a regular yellow pencil. Notice the yellow color and the sharp point of the lead on one side and the pink eraser on the other. And you might even see the Eberhard label with the number 2 on it. Now, so while you're doing that, that image of the pencil is coming in from the memory, your memory. Now notice that pencil. Your eyes are still open. Notice that the pencil is somewhat translucent. You can see through it, meaning you can still see the stuff that's coming in through your eyes. That's a little brighter. And so the memory of the pencil is dimmer. Now, remote viewing images are in the mind also, but they're much dimmer and much foggier, much fuzzier. Now, they're always there for everybody. It's just that the mind has evolved to screen out all of those things so that you only get the images that you're looking at, or if you need to, ones that you remember. But the other images of information that we would call remote viewing actually are accessible to anybody, but a remote viewer is highly trained to pay attention to those other things and to focus on them. So what remote viewing is it's a mental procedure that enables somebody to transfer information across time and space, meaning they can perceive anything in the past, present, or future, and anywhere. Distance is no object. Now, this actually scares physicists quite a lot because it absolutely violates the laws of Newtonian physics as well as relativistic physics, because you're transferring information across time as well as space. So, but we now understand the science, the physics of why this actually works. But this basically does mean that the understanding of physics as we classically understood it with classical Newtonian physics and relativistic physics is incomplete. It's wrong to say that it's wrong, because we do use relativistic physics, for example, to calculate slight aberrations that you see when the light from a star is passing near the sun and the light from the star is bent slightly. So relativity actually does work in those things. But what we understand now is it's actually a subset of a much greater reality, and the relativistic physics and the classical Newtonian physics simply do not address this other thought. So classical and relativistic physics are a subset of a much larger set of rules of physics. So what we do know now is that the remote viewing phenomenon closely patterns itself, completely patterns itself, after what I consider to be a generalization of quantum mechanics. So the stuff that goes on in quantum mechanics is very similar. It's identical to the stuff that goes on in that we pick up with remote viewing. The quantum mechanics idea is that, and Einstein, for example, had a great deal of difficulty with quantum mechanics. He argued with it tremendously. But what we do know is the stuff that goes on in quantum mechanics, most physicists say there's an imaginary line of decoherence, where it's like Vegas. What goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. Or what goes on in the quantum world stays in the quantum world. However, that's a ludicrous assumption, because everything that we are, our bodies, our houses, our cars, everything, the whole physical universe is completely made up of quantum stuff. Subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and so on. And so to say that we're different, everything that goes on in the quantum world stays there, and everything that goes on in the classical big world stays here, and we don't need to really understand the connection between the two. That's completely unsupportable. And so what we have done is we've advanced to the point where we now understand how quantum mechanics generalizes out to the macro world, or the big world. And it's because of our remote viewing studies that we gain the insight to enable us to make the generalizations to quantum mechanics. So I don't know how much you want me to get into it, but that's sort of a general overview of what the phenomenon actually is.
I wanted to ask you, because that brings up the fact that right now in physics there seems to be a return to the concept of an ether, and that implies a lattice structure to space itself. And that implies crystalline structure, which is a storage medium for information.
Well, actually, this is very interesting, because this is one of the things that scares physicists so much about the remote viewing stuff. By the way, I should say that 15 plus years ago, people were basically laughing. I am the only, I can say first, I am the world's leading scholar in the subject of remote viewing as it is performed using exact military or military-derived exact military procedures used for remote viewing, or procedures that are derivative of those procedures, those methodologies. And so 15 plus years ago, all of my academic colleagues were laughing. Everyone just basically said, I was deluded, This is ridiculous, and so on. It's gotten to the point now where nobody's laughing. There's not a single soul out there that's laughing. It's like the movie Waiting to Exhale. It had Whitney Houston in it, so on. And the idea is that everybody's just holding their breath. Bernard, never bet against a smart guy who never backs down.
Yeah.
And right now, that's exactly what the mainstream scientific community is doing. They originally bet against it, but then they realized I never backed down. And the research continued, the theoretical developments continued, and now everybody's silent, holding their breath, saying, oh my gosh, what does this mean if it turns out to be true? And we now know it's completely true. And anyone who knows anything about the remote viewing phenomenon at all is totally not in dispute. Especially within military circles, they may not understand the physics of it, although I'm sure they watch and read my stuff, but they know how to use it. And they do. So we use it for scientific experiments and exploration, both into the nature of physical reality, the nature of time, but also the exploration of mysteries. And so we do that also.
Well, and this is as good a point as any to give us a little background on who you are. Why is anybody paying attention at all? And of course, a couple of clicks on Google, and we find out that you're an applied mathematician. You've published in a number of different disciplines, and you've got a really interesting academic background.
Yeah, I am a university professor. I've published a lot of books and articles in the leading places. However, I do not do remote viewing research at the university. I'm an applied mathematician, and I work in a social science program at Emory University. And at the university, I teach mostly statistics and nonlinear differential equation courses within a social science program. And so I'm an applied mathematician, but that actually, so I do not do the remote viewing research at the university. Mm-hmm. I do it at the Farsight Institute. That's FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. Farsight is spelled like seeing far, FARSIGHT.org. And the Farsight Institute is the only science shop on the planet where we do these full-blown studies and show everybody our data and the analyses and videos and everything. So we really are fully accessible to people, and we've actually mastered the realm of public participation in our experiments. For a great many of our experiments, we actually have the public verify the experiments by using military-grade encryption. For example, time really does not exist. It's something that we experience, but it doesn't exist as a real demarcation. For example, when you're remote viewing, remote viewers can remote view things in the past as easily as they can remote view things in the present or the future. Mm-hmm. So with remote viewing, it's quite clear that the past, present, and future are simultaneously going on at the exact same time. So there is no such thing as having something in the past and then it going away. It never goes away. It's always there, and you can always revisit it with remote viewing. However, with the idea that you can transfer information across time and space, it is very scary to my physics colleagues because information is equivalent to energy. Yeah. And energy, remember, E equals mc squared. Right. C is a constant, speed of light, so c squared is a constant. So you're really saying that's just a scaling factor. So the equation really says energy equals mass. So information we've known ever since the days of Rolf Landauer, but actually we know experimentally now, is equivalent to energy. For example, if you take information, this has been confirmed in laboratory experiments, if you take information and destroy the information, energy is released, and they can measure it, and they can measure it in a lab. So organization of stuff, we often think of information as just stuff we know, but it's more than that. Information actually is an assembly of energy. And so when we're transferring information across time and space through perceptions, we are equivalently transferring mass and energy across time and space. And that really rocks the physics world. And that's why everyone's really sort of holding their breath, because they realize the entire infrastructure of classical and relativistic physics is going to have to be completely redone from scratch.
Well, of course,
it means everything.
It violates the whole cause and effect thing. You know, the whole linear time is the foundation of physics as
Absolutely.
We understand it.
Yeah, and I should say that I'm really happy in career choices that I ended up being a mathematician, because it was because I became a mathematician that I was able to understand the language of physics, which is mathematics. And had I not done that, it would have made that more inaccessible, but that was very good. The other thing is, when I look at the social sciences, I do it differently than most social scientists. I look at everything in terms of nonlinear terms. That's why I study nonlinear systems of differential equations, for example, when I look at social scientific problems. And it's very interesting that I look at the social sciences very much as the way physicists look at particles, whereas where they look at particles, I'm looking at people. But now that we've generalized the concept of quantum mechanics to the macro world, you can do that. And one of the early projects we did, for example, is called the Multiple Universes Project. And that project is the data and experimental design and the analysis was recently published in a leading peer-reviewed journal, the Journal for Scientific Exploration. It was the first major article that came out using these second-generation military-grade, civilian but military-grade remote viewers, people who were trained by military people. And that came out in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, and the article can be found for free actually on our website, which is www.farsight.org. And on the front page, you see a banner saying, latest peer-reviewed published research, remote viewing the future. And that gives you the PDF of the article. So that's really useful for people to be able to say, when people say, well, if this stuff is real, why don't you have published, peer-reviewed research? Well, we do.
There it is,
There it is, and then all the stuff is there. And so one of the ways that we have been involving the public, we really don't like the idea that the way much of science works with regard to experimentation, in the sense that scientists go into their labs and do experiments and then come out and say, I made this discovery in my laboratory, trust me. And so with subjects like remote viewing, you can't, they have done that consistently, but we don't do that. We don't like to do that. So at the Farsight Institute, we have mastered the realm of public participation. And since time doesn't exist, I'm going to say something now, Bernard, and at this point, I want to warn you that after I talk about it, you're going to have to go to a chiropractor, because it's going to twist your head around so much, the neck will get a kink in it. So, but get this, what we've done, for example, in the Multiple Universes Project, the idea was, it was a test to see if there are multiple realities, multiple futures, parallel universes, something that you'd see out of science fiction. But we were getting an awful lot of results that suggested the multiple reality issue. And that's actually a big deal in physics right now. It actually was long scoffed at, but in 1957, a physicist named Hugh Everett, who was a graduate student at Princeton working under John Wheeler, he came up with an idea that was a reinterpretation of quantum mechanics, where the probabilistic, you called it the ether, but the sort of the probabilistic realm from which quantum mechanical stuff appears, the classical quantum mechanics people said that when you observe something, one reality snaps out of that probabilistic mass, and all the other possibilities disappear. Well, they had no reason to believe they disappear. They just didn't want to think of the idea of many things.
Too many numbers, yeah.
Yeah. Whoever says that was a monstrosity, and that just simply is ridiculous. And so he said, not only does a quantum mechanics particle, a subatomic particle, have a wave function, referring to the classical Schrodinger's equation, but if you put a few subatomic particles together, you have an atom, and that has a wave function. And quantum mechanics people aren't upset by that. But he said, well, then just keep on the process. And you have a molecule, and then you have a cell, and then you have a person. So the person has a wave function, the house has a wave function, the planet has a wave function, and yes, the universe has a wave function. And so the generalization that he developed in 1957 was that there are multiple versions of all of us, an infinite variety. And it's not that the others go away when we see them, when we see one. It's not that the others disappear, but they exist simultaneously with us in their own right, and they're equivalent to us. They're just different versions of us. And this was too much for physicists to handle back in those days. And it's not until recent, by the way, whoever was laughed out of physics, he was so disgusted he left it. I went to work for the Defense Department, and he was the prime intellectual innovator for a lot of the nuclear stuff that came out during the Cold War, such as the philosophy of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction.
Right, yeah.
You see, there actually were generals back in those days and others who were arguing in favor of a first strike against the Soviet Union and China in order to get rid of enemies now rather than worry about them later. And Hugh Everett was the one who successfully argued that this would destroy the entire planet and that the United States would be gone as well because of the fallout and retribution and so on. And he won the day, and very fortunately he won the day, and we're all alive today because of that. And but that's what he ended up doing. He left the academic world, and he started working with nuclear stuff with the Defense Department. And mutually assured destruction, or MAD, was basically the idea is you build your weapons, I'll build my weapons, but as long as we know that if either one of us fired them, we would all die, then nobody will shoot. And that was the idea behind MAD. And it was crazy, but it worked, and it kept us all alive. And nobody shot any weapons.
Yeah, the balance of terror, as they say.
The balance of terror. Anyway, so with the Multiple Universes project, this is how we did it. This is where you're going to have to go to the chiropractor afterwards. Since time doesn't exist and multiple realities exist, how do you remote view the future? It's easy to remote view the past because you know what you're looking for. Now remote viewers, when they do their procedures, it's always done, it must be done, always totally blind, in the sense that the remote viewers are never told anything about a target. They're just told the target is the thing that they're supposed to perceive, but all they're told is there's a target, go remote view it, end of story. So what remote viewers do is they focus their perceptions on this thing, but it doesn't matter, we figured out, when the target is assigned. So for this experiment, the Multiple Universes project, we had the remote viewers do their sessions first, meaning there was no target.
Yeah,
there was nothing.
And that's the part that really, like you said, twisted my head around.
You
assign the target after the viewing.
Yeah, so the viewers would do their sessions. They go into their rooms individually and they do a session. There is no target. We take the sessions, nobody looks at them. We encrypt them, except the viewer. We encrypt them in 256-bit military-grade encryption. We put it up on the web. Tens of thousands of people all over the world downloaded those sessions. And then, interestingly, let's say that was done in the month of January. Well, then the target we said will occur sometime, some public event that everyone could verify in the month of February. But it's not until the month of March that we're going to have somebody pick a target from the month of February. So the sessions were done in January, uploaded to the web. No one could see them because they were encrypted with 256-bit encryption, but they could still download them and hold them to know that we can't cheat. The target itself will occur somewhere in the month of February, and somebody in March who was a pre-assigned before we even started this, was going to look in March. The person would look at in the newspaper and on the web of everything in the world that happened in February and say, I wonder when I'm going to assign these remote viewers as a target. Mind you, the sessions are already done. And he in March is figuring out, when am I going to assign these remote viewers as a target? So he picks something in the month of February, sends it to us. We upload it to the website, let people see it, upload also the password to decrypt the sessions. Everything unravels, and you see a perfect match, perfect descriptions of the target that happened in February that was chosen in March, but the descriptions are in sessions that were written in January. And that was so cool, and it worked so well. So that was proof for us. It was an a priori prediction that if we have a situation of multiple realities, we have to be able to pick one reality out of a multiplicity of realities from the future. To do that, we have to have somebody who's experienced a particular single reality. So we have to have somebody that we call a temporal outbounder, someone in the future who's cooperating with us to pick the targets. And it worked like a charm. It was an a priori prediction that it would work, and so remote viewing the future works as easily as remote viewing the past when we use this temporal outbounder in the future.
Well, let me ask you, how do you pick somebody in the future?
Well, it was somebody when we're setting up the experiment, we simply make an arrangement with a trusted person to say, when March rolls around, will you pick a target for us out of the month of February?
I see. Okay.
So we do the sessions in January, knowing that the person's going to be there for us, cooperating in March. And sure enough, when March rolls around, he's scratching his chin and saying, what shall I pick from the month of February? And the targets were very varied, and they were totally unpredictable. For example, one target was the launch of the Kepler mission from Cape Canaveral. Then a tornado that whipped through Minot, Arkansas. Then we had the landing of a space shuttle. Then we had a paragliding event at the World Air Games in Turin, Italy. Then a musical festival and the Estonian Laulupidu, or Song Festival. And we had, then there was even the NASA bombing of the moon in the so-called Lacrosse mission, where they sent 2 satellites to crash into a crater that they thought had ice in it, hoping that it would kick up the ice and they'd be able to see how much water's on the moon. And then we did a Thanksgiving Day parade, and even the Norwegian spiral anomaly. And then the lighting of the cauldron of the 2010 Olympic Games. That was interesting because the device that was there broke. It had 4 arms, but only only 3 actually worked. So that was very interesting. All these are very unique, and these military-grade remote viewers, they don't produce like noisy data sets. They produce sessions that are spitting image of what's actually there.
Well, that's if you go to your website and read some of their writings, it's like, I mean, they're telling you it's cold and it's hard to breathe, and I smell a certain odor. I mean, they're very specific.
And the sketches are incredible. So it's really great. Anyway, so that's the type of research that we do. For your listeners, I might say something that we do have new stuff coming out also. It's constantly. We're always working on something. So if they go to the website for the Farsight Institute, www.farsight.org, it'd be good to sign up for the free newsletter. Now, we rarely send stuff out, so there's no issue of spam. Usually once or twice a month we send something out just to announce something new that we're doing. So it's free, and it's a newsletter that keeps people informed, and it's a good thing to do. For those people who would... We have had some complaints. Let me tell you what the complaint is. We do so much stuff that often when people come to the website for the Farsight Institute, they're overwhelmed. They see so many projects and so much stuff going on. We often get complaints to say, like, where do I start? and we're the only science shop that does this. There's no place else that exists where you can find this type of stuff. And for those people who are even interested in methodologies, we even have a free 18-hour, 24-lesson audio course and some procedures, plus a printable text, it works. So for people in your audience that are interested in sort of the easy way to hit the ground running, the best way we do is we finally decided to put out a DVD called The Farsight Experiments. And a picture of the DVD is right on the home page. Mm-hmm. And that we designed specially, it's sold through Amazon, and we designed it specially to allow people to say, I want to know what you guys are doing, and it's just, you got too much stuff here. So that's it. The DVD, if they get the DVD, the whole thing explains, all of our projects are explained. Everything is tied together in one sitting, and Amazon ships internationally with ease. Sure. DVDs. So in case any of your listeners are interested in that, the Farsight Experiments is a very nice DVD to sort of get, hit the ground running.
Well, and actually that's a perfect point to bring up really what I wanted to talk about tonight, because one of your experiments from the past few years was the environmental, the global changes.
Yes.
And a lot of what you were writing about, or what your viewers were looking at, affects us pretty profoundly here in Southeast Asia. Yeah. And a lot of my listeners are familiar with Cliff High's work with the web bots, and there seems to be an interesting synchronicity between the two processes.
Yeah, Cliff High's work is very interesting. Basically, what he's doing is he's assuming that there's a form of remote viewing that goes on subconsciously in people, and that it comes out in words that are used across the internet. And if you monitor these words, you sort of pick these subconscious references that are coming through. It's not surprising, but it's very interesting that there is a correlation between Cliff High's work and the stuff that we do. I have to say that when I tell people about the so-called post-2012 Earth Changes project, we were not looking for that. I was never a follower of this so-called Mayan calendar stuff. I thought the whole thing was ridiculous. And this was a project that we initiated it was actually a test to see if remote viewing could be used to perceive small things like climate change across a 5-year period. So we did a test with a whole bunch of targets under the most unbelievably squeaky clean conditions that you can imagine. I'll explain some of those if you want.
Sure. A little bit. Set up, why is squeaky clean?
Yeah, well, it was the experiment was set up to detect climate change between June 1st, 2008 and June 1st, 2013. And I was expecting maybe a little bit of snow difference on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, perhaps an inch rising of seawater, perhaps some more storms. But what we got just completely blew us away. I mean, it was just totally unexpected and totally unbelievable. But we got huge results. So I had to eat my thoughts about the Mayan calendar stuff. I said, wow, this is unbelievable. And we did it under squeaky clean conditions. For example, when the remote viewers did the sessions, they did not know the targets, and they knew this was a climate change project, but they didn't know they didn't know the targets themselves, and they didn't know, and it was absolutely impossible for anyone to know, including myself, because of the method of randomization that we used, to know whether they were doing a 2008 session or a 2013 session when they did the sessions. All the sessions were put up on the web, encrypted, and the targets were assigned. The targets are the things that the viewers are supposed to focus on. Those were assigned to the sessions after all the sessions were done and put up on the web and downloaded by tens of thousands of people. So, and the process for assigning which session went to which target was a total randomization thing that included a number sort of an initiation number that came out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average for June 4th after everything was over for 2008. So, I mean, nobody, including myself, could have known what targets were associated with what sessions. But what we found out was huge. In 2008, there was essentially no disaster content in these sessions. So the sessions were of places like Vaitupu, Tuvalu in the South Pacific, Fort Jesus, old Portuguese fort on the coast of Kenya on the East Indian Ocean, and Mombasa, the Sydney Opera House in Sydney, Australia, with that unique architecture, Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, the United States Congress Building, Male International Airport in Male in the Maldives, the KITV building in Honolulu, Hawaii. And that was interesting because one of our very best remote viewers, Dick Allgaier, is a celebrity newscaster in KITV. And so we said, I put that one as sort of just a joke on him, just a trick to see it, but it was a good target. And then Key West, Florida, for example. And when we did the sessions for 2008, there were no disaster content, meaning all the tourists were still going to the beaches. Congress was still meeting. The KITV building was absolutely unambiguously a television studio with really great descriptions of cameramen working the cameras and the lights and the audiences and the stage, and everything's perfect. Key West, everyone's still doing their normal stuff. Sydney Opera House is still Sydney Opera House. And the sessions were really, really good and they're absolutely unambiguous. For example, a session by Daz Smith for Sydney Opera House. He not only drew the exact architecture of the Sydney Opera House really well, but he identified what it was. He said, "This is Sydney." And these remote viewers are
architecture.
Yeah, he just recognized it from the architecture. He said, "This has got to be Sydney." And so these remote viewers are really, really, really good. Some people call them scary good, but they've trained. Like anyone can go. It's like playing the piano. Anyone can go up to a piano and bang on it. But if you want to play in Carnegie Hall and become scary good, you got to practice and you have to work. Now these people have worked. Basically, I work with primarily two groups, but some others also. But those are people who work under the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild auspices. That's led by Glenn Wheaton, and he came out of Special Forces Intelligence. And then I work with people that work with viewers that work with Lynn Buchanan, and he came out of Defense Intelligence Agency. And he's trained a large number of viewers who work with procedures called CRV, or Controlled Remote Viewing. And the HRVG procedures are different from the CRV procedures. The intellectual heritage is different. The HRVG procedures have an intellectual heritage tied to Dr. Richard Ireland, and the CRV procedures have an intellectual heritage that's tied to Ingo Swann. So these were creative psychics, basically, that figured out what their minds were doing when they were able to do these things. And then once they figured out what their minds were able to do, what they were doing when they were able to receive things across time and space, they then taught those things and showed other people how to do it. And the Defense Department loved it. Now, the DIA program was an official program. The Special Forces stuff involving remote viewing that Glenn Wheaton was involved in, that was more of an unofficial movement within the military that later became known as the 1st Earth Battalion. But nonetheless,
men staring at goats. Is that the?
Yeah.
Okay. Trying to kill goats with their minds.
Yeah. In fact, that movie, the two military consultants for that movie were Glenn Wheaton and Jim Channon, and both of whom had played people played their parts in the movie. These are official consultants. Their names are on the credits, things like that. And the main remote viewing character that is played, that Glenn Wheaton was being represented. Glenn Wheaton was being represented by was George Clooney in the movie,
right.
And they named George Clooney's character Lynn as a reference to Lynn Buchanan, as a way to share the concept of remote viewing in the military. So they used Lynn Buchanan's name, but the actual stuff that was in the movie was dealing with special forces, and the George Clooney person was a hybrid between Lynn Buchanan and Glenn Wheaton. But Glenn Wheaton was the official military consultant for that, plus Jim Channon. And Jim Channon's part was played by Jeff Bridges.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, so that's sort of the background for that. But getting back to this post-2012 climate project change, remember that it's an experiment, and it closes June 1st, 2013. So we don't know if I'm not making a deterministic prediction. I'm just describing what happened with the data. It had no disaster content. Essentially, for 2008, everything was normal. But when the 2013 data were looked at, there was huge disaster content. I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes. And so, for example, we had, well, how about I just sort of summarize, and then you can ask me some specifics if you want.
Well, before you get to that, just real quick, the 2013 data, you added an extra twist to it.
Yeah, we had two timelines. Remember, I was becoming convinced that multiple timelines exist. So the question was, how do we control for timelines? Now, we knew we could use I know now that we can use a temporal outbounder, but we don't have a temporal outbounder for the 2013. So the question was, well, if you have multiple realities, what if you specify the nature of the timeline that you want? So, for example, let us say we have a timeline that X, Y, and Z happens in the future. Right? And then what we have is another timeline where A, B, and C happens in the future. What does 2013, June 1st, look like for the first timeline, and how does that differ from the second timeline? Now, neither one of those timelines will be our timeline, but our timeline may be more like one than the other. So if you have a temporal outbounder, you can pick out an exact timeline. This experiment is to say, well, can you specify the nature of the timeline you want, and then either you can change your own personal activity so that you can get your own timeline, or can you at least evaluate whether your timeline is similar to another timeline. So in this case, the two timelines were 2013, June 1st, following the timeline, I call this timeline A, in which the leadership of the mainstream global scientific establishment continues to ignore or deny the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon and the existence of life not originating from Earth, even microbial. And the idea was that if the scientific establishment did the opposite, if they did acknowledge the reality of remote viewing and the existence of any type of life not originating from Earth, then the idea was that the entire planet would respond immediately, and maybe we would act differently towards our planet, and we might be able to pick that up in terms of climate change. We would be more protective of our planet. So the second timeline was following the timeline in which by the end of 2009, which already passed, the leaders of the mainstream global scientific establishment publicly recognized the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon and the existence of life not originating from Earth. Now, mind you, that timeline is already passed, 2009. Well, 2009 is already passed, and that timeline says that the scientific establishment publicly recognizes the reality of remote viewing by that time. That hasn't happened. So what we can say is we still haven't gotten to June 1st, 2013. So what we're saying is we still have time, and if during the time, perhaps in the next 5 or 6 months, the scientific community does publicly recognize in some major fashion the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon, then we could say that we are more like timeline B than timeline A. Neither one would be our exact timeline, but it would be more like one than the other. So that would be a way for us to predict things. Now, the other thing the other theoretical aspect of this whole thing is that I have found that small changes or small events don't affect many timelines. For example, Brennan, right today, I am wearing a blue shirt. Now, according to the theory, there are other realities where I'm wearing a different color shirt, say a white shirt or a red shirt. And there are other realities where you're not even interviewing me, you're interviewing somebody else. And it goes on and on and on. So with the multiple timelines, the question is, what importance is the color of my shirt? That's a very minor event. And what happens in one timeline with the color of one shirt really doesn't affect other timelines. But if you have a bigger event like an earthquake, it'll affect more timelines. So with an earthquake, you will have many realities experiencing the earthquake, but on the same day, but the earthquake will be smaller and less significant in some realities and devastating in other realities. But you'll notice it. So an earthquake will happen at the right time, but different impacts. So the bigger the event, the more realities are affected by it.
Yeah.
Now, with this global post-2012 Earth changes, the influences are so big that they affect the entire planet. So the idea is, the theory is, that with something like this, the events would affect all timelines, or almost all timelines. So it becomes like a juggernaut, and all timelines have to funnel through it because the event is so all-encompassing. So small events won't affect many other timelines. Bigger events affect more timelines. Humongous events affect almost all timelines, and all timelines have to sort of go through the juggernaut. So that's the theory. Now, it's not confirmed yet. So we actually have to wait till June 1st, 2013. So remember, all your listeners, this is an experiment. It's not a deterministic prediction. It's not me saying this is what's going to happen. It's me saying these are what the data say, and this is the experiment, and this is what we will know come around June 1st, 2013, if this is corroborated or not. And if the descriptions of what's going to happen in 2013 are correct, we will know by June 1st, 2013, and that will essentially prove the theory.
If we're around to prove it.
The events are really quite big. You want me to summarize in general form what the results are that we got?
Yeah, please.
Well, the general results are, and by the way, this is all captured in the DVD as well. So the Farsight experiments. It's very important to watch the whole DVD because in order to understand the post-2012 climate project, you have to also understand the multiple universes project. And then we also have on the DVD a project dealing with a base, a high technology base on Mars, where we have a very clear Malin Space Science Systems JPL NASA photograph of the base, and the remote viewers were sent under totally blind conditions, and they replicated everything in the photograph, including a spray, horizontal spray, a nozzle that's there, plus a pipeline going to a dome, the whole thing. Plus they went into the domes and explored the whole thing. So this is not one of those vague things where you say, oh, yeah, there's bases on Mars. This is a thing where we say, there it is exactly, there's the picture for it, and here's the remote viewing data that describe everything. We even have some of the chemical composition of the spray. It's a waste disposal thing. Anyway, but that's there. And also there was a planet between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. This is a theory that was promoted heavily with a huge amount of planetary data by the late astronomer Thomas Van Flandern, and that exploded and caused the asteroid belt. It was widely scoffed at by the mainstream scientific astronomical community, but Thomas Van Flandern was head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory. He was very mainstream, and this was a theory that he had, and we did a test of that with remote viewing, and it absolutely knocked it out of the ballpark. Thomas Van Flandern was totally correct. There was a planet. It did explode. Anyway, all these things are contained in the DVD plus more. And so that's sort of the place to sort of get the whole package. But anyway, here, in terms of the general issues dealing with physical changes across many of the geographical locations that I discussed, by mid-2013, we found, really oddly, impacts of all things, which is the last thing I was thinking about, from what appeared to be large meteors leading to tsunamis and possible volcanism. Also, extensive and forceful flooding of coastal areas. Also, excessive solar radiation and storms and other severe weather. Now, in terms of the effects on humans, we found massive self-organized relocation away from the coastal areas, refugees. A complete breakdown of the rescue or other notable governmental functioning. For example, we didn't see any National Guard or rescue helicopters. It was just non-existent.
You're on your own.
We also had the breakdown of the food supply system. So the idea of going to the local grocery store to pick up everything wasn't there. And then the breakdown of the vehicular transport system. And also extensive loss of buildings that are near the coast. Now, mind you, we were looking near the coast because I was looking for possible climate change stuff originally, looking that there might be more storms and that might be more perceptible near coasts, perhaps if there was a little increase in the sea level rise. So the data set is slanted in the direction of inland area. Coastal areas in the first place. So we were not really looking for Earth changes. We were looking for climate changes. But what we got were Earth changes. And so the fact that we have so much data on coasts is...
That's kind of what shook out of the data.
Yeah, what you get out, what you get in, what you put in, and that's what we sort of put in. But those are the basic ideas that we got. And then we have lots of data for those specific regions that we looked at. And it was very unnerving at any rate, but I just want to emphasize to your listeners that this is an experiment. It's not a deterministic prediction. It's a very odd experiment. It's a very interesting experiment, but it's an experiment nonetheless.
So we shouldn't all go running for the hills now, right?
No, and it's also very clearly not the end of the world. If this stuff does turn out to be accurate, Earth changes for sure, and there'll be a reorientation of what we need to do. But it's not the end of civilization or the world. There are still humans on the planet, and we're still doing stuff, and we're still going to be a species with a destiny. But it's a very strange and unusual time period that we may be heading into.
Yeah. In fact, on your website, you came up with a list of things that would imply that governments at least have some foreknowledge of this from their behaviors.
No, this part is non-scientific. For example...
This is speculation, right?
It's speculation, but listen, it's like this. Let's say you go to your house and you say, I have a funny feeling that there's something anomalous, something unusual with the house. So you go into the house and you find a gorilla in your bedroom. And you come out and you say, you see, I proved my theory. There's a gorilla in my bedroom. Well, that's not scientific. You can't pick the data to fit your theory. In reality, to do it scientifically, you have to do a survey of each room, categorize the data, evaluate how it is, do a statistical analysis, and so on like that. And then at the very end, there does seem to be, the data seem to show an anomaly that occurs in the bedroom. A gorilla is there. So, that's how science does it. But some anomalies are so anomalous that they stand on their own, and you just sort of say, whoa, there is a gorilla in the bedroom. Sure, shoot. And so these are a list of those types of anomalies that are really odd, but again, I just want to emphasize it's not scientific. So I'll go through some of them. For example, the United States manned space program has completely shut down.
Right.
Now, we have a long history of space exploration going all the way back to the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo stuff, and we shut it down entirely. The space shuttle's not there, and they have no replacement program for the space shuttle. And it was presented as if all those PhDs at NASA simply forgot that the space shuttle was going to be phased out and getting old. And these people have to pay their mortgages. And you're actually trying to convince people that all these PhDs simply woke up one morning and said, oh my gosh, I forgot we don't have a replacement for the space shuttle. What are we going to do? We're out of business. So that really doesn't make sense. So the reality is they shut down the space program, and it's the manned space program, and they're acting as if they knew that there would be a period of time in which they would not be able to fly in space. Now, the second anomaly is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Now, that's in Norway, in northern islands of Norway, and it's essentially sealed, and it has every agricultural seed on the planet. And the idea is, why did it have to be finished and sealed up by this year? Why the rush? Why not keep on collecting agricultural seeds for the next 20, 30 years? I mean, why the big rush to build it and seal it now?
Right.
Now, it's also been inspected by the head of the United Nations and his team, which is sort of odd because it's a Norwegian project, an oddball Norwegian project. Why would the entire United Nations inspect it? So anyway, see, this is just anomalous. And then another thing is the U.S. and the global debt. The governments are acting as if they are not expecting to have to pay back their debts. They can't pay back debts. The U.S. can't pay back the debt it owes. And so it's as if they're expecting some type of global economic reset for reasons that are not currently stated. So that's sort of the odd thing. And then the dollar seems to be devaluing in a trend. For example, Moody's, Standard & Poor, and Fitch all announced their plans to devalue the rating of the U.S. Treasury bonds. And there's discussions at the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund that it'd be good to phase out the dependency on the U.S. dollar. So they're acting as if the dollar is not going to be around or needed. And then another anomaly is that there's digging absolutely everywhere. The U.S., now, be very clear here, I am not criticizing the United States. It's just a way of thinking. People are different cultures.
Sure, yeah.
The U.S. culture thinks in terms of the elite and the military. And so they are digging, and they have huge underground facilities under military bases in the West that are in areas that are totally inhospitable, and the masses can't get access to them. But you could put the entire state of New York under that. The entire U.S. military can fit under those bases. Now, we also have facilities, this is not widely known, but we also have facilities elsewhere in the Svalbard Islands that we paid for that can house enormous numbers of people, 5 million. But the point is, the Chinese and the Russians, for example, think differently. They always think in terms of security that they win if more of their people survive. So they always think in terms of the masses. Again, I'm not criticizing one view or the other. I'm just saying this is difference in the way cultures think.
They view it, yeah.
So, yeah, and in Russia, for example, they have subway systems throughout their major cities that are built deeper than normal so that they can handle, serve as nuclear bomb shelters. In addition, Russia announced in 2011 that they were going to build a crash program of 5,000 brand new nuclear bomb shelters in Moscow, so that all of the residents of Moscow, they already had 5,000, so they're building an extra 5,000, in a crash program that had to be finished this year, so that all the residents of Moscow would have a place to go. Now, the Chinese, similarly, are building subway systems, but up to 200 miles of subway systems a year in a crash program to be finished this year. Now the question is, why all these crash programs have to be finished this year?
And all subterranean, yeah.
And they're all subterranean. See, subway systems can be used to house millions of people. They just simply open the doors and there they go. And so the idea is, if they were just going to build them, that's one thing. But why the crash program in the context in which they have no nuclear enemies? Meaning, why is Russia and China doing this if they have no nuclear enemies? 5,000 new nuclear bomb shelters in Moscow, that's expensive. And there are no... Yeah, and there's no nuclear enemies. Isn't there something better to spend your money on? I mean, I could understand during the Cold War when the U.S. was threatening the Soviet Union, but that's ancient history. They have no nuclear weapons. So all this digging is, and all the digging in crash programs that have to be finished this year, I call that a big gorilla. That's why is that? It's an anomalous.
Yeah.
And we also have the situation of NASA predicting that the sun is going to have unprecedented solar storms for a lengthy period of time in 2013.
Right, that's a little bit strange.
Yeah, and unprecedented means there's no past to compare it with. And normally we predict the future by looking at the past, so how can they predict unprecedented? Secondly, when they are talking about these solar storms, they're talking about them as similar to what they call Carrington events, which is a scientist back in 1859 that noted that a solar flare caused a knockout of the telegraph system. Basically, 1-inch sparks were flying off the telegraph wires.
Yeah.
And the context is that we are more dependent now on advanced technologies such as computers, and a big EMP pulse coming from solar flares would knock out our computers and our telecommunications, the power grid, and so on. But, you know, they're sort of associating this with the 11-year cycle. But the 11-year cycle of the sun, that includes 1990 and also 2001. We had plenty of computers in those years.
Well, and even before that, I mean, as far back as the 60s, they've had vacuum tube, room full of computers.
And the issue is that nothing happened then. So why is this thing about unprecedented weather? We can't even predict weather on Earth a week in advance, and they're predicting years in advance that the sun's going to act in an unprecedented way. Mm-hmm. So I can consider that an anomalous event. So that's a list of some of the weird things that are going on, and that's, to me, they're like the gorilla in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. Which is, and again, I'm not complaining and I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying that these are behaviors that we would expect governments to do if they knew something was going to happen and they did not want to announce it to cause panic to their populace, right. But on the other hand, to do something about it. And it sort of fits in with the way populations think about these types of things, which is the Russians and Chinese are acting in a way that's characteristic for them, and the U.S. is acting in ways that are characteristic for it. So,
well, just speculating again, briefly. Suppose the Mayan calendar was a meme planted in the culture in order to prepare people or to get them in a mood for preparing.
Well, actually, Bernard, you're raising a really good point. Actually, I think that's what it is. I also have a long history of a personal hobby of mine of using remote viewing to study the subject of extraterrestrial life. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I think happened. I think what happened is the idea that priests in the Mayan civilization could have actually thought of this date and done something with that is ridiculous.
Well, the calendar is completely circular. It just keeps starting over and over again.
Yeah, but it makes perfect sense for extraterrestrials to have planted this date by simply manipulating a few of the priests in the calendar so that when it came time for us here, we would be talking about it. And so it's a way to get us talking about it in sort of an indirect way to have us sort of draw the conclusions ourselves. So that's what I think actually happened. I think that they actually did plant the idea, and that's why we're talking about it. And now we're seeing that in fact there's something there.
Yeah. That's a really interesting concept. The whole thing, from the time you started talking to now, has all been a mind twister. The work you're doing is astounding.
It's interesting and mind twisting even for me. There's never a day where this is not anything except exciting. And when we do these experiments, I'm the chief investigating officer for the Farsight Institute. But, this twists my head around as much as it twists everybody else's head around.
Yeah.
But the further we get into it, the more we see how it all makes sense. The big challenge of everything is intellectually divorcing oneself from the idea that mainstream science already knows everything. Oh, yeah. Once you realize that they really don't know anything, they know some things, but there are huge gaps in what they know.
Right.
Once you realize that those gaps are very real, you intellectually free yourself up to say, okay, if they really don't know what they're talking about, what is going on? And then, if you look at the actual results you get from doing these experiments, if you don't ignore them but accept them as real, then it leads you down a path of discovery that is just absolutely spectacular. Now, a lot of people have trouble with that. For example, Paul Dirac, the famous physicist, he said basically with quantum mechanics, we don't need to know why it works. All we need to know is that the calculations work. And the physicists are really good at calculating quantum mechanics. Mm-hmm. They know how to make the numbers work. They're really good at that. But they don't understand the underlying theory of quantum mechanics. They don't understand the interpretation of quantum mechanics. And that's what we're actually getting to now. Now we're starting to understand it. And it's interesting that we're starting to understand the interpretation of quantum mechanics because we have generalized a theory that was widely ridiculed in 1957, Hugh Everett's idea of other worlds, to the macro world. And it's our understanding now of phenomena that we use in the macro world that gives us purchase to re-understand quantum mechanics. So I see a future in which social scientists like myself work hand in hand with physicists in terms of understanding the nature of physical reality. It's not just physicists work with atom smashers, subatomic particles, things like that. But social scientists will work with people in the very same way, and we'll be looking at these multiple realities and other things the same way physicists do, and they'll collaborate. That's the kind of future that I see. It's not happening now to a great extent, but it is happening. One of my best friends, perhaps my best friend ever, was a man called John Russell, and he was a physicist, got his PhD in physics from Rice University, and worked at Georgia Institute of Technology in the Department of Nuclear Energy. He was a nuclear physicist. He was also the inventor of the first palladium seeds. Seeds are little rice-shaped pellets that are used to treat various forms of cancer, including prostate cancer. And they stick those little seeds into the tumors, and tumors go away. And he worked with me for 15 years, tutoring me as my personal private tutor in physics and quantum mechanics. I mean, you can't get better than that.
Yeah, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, and to have your own personal tutor, and to have that tutor be John Russell, that was his name, John Russell. I have his picture, in fact, up on the cover of my Facebook page. Anyway, so that type of collaboration, that type of cooperation between a social scientist like myself and John Russell, a very mainstream physicist, is the type of thing I see happening in the future. I literally lived the life of that type of cooperation that I'm hoping happens in a widespread fashion in the future.
Yeah, more of a blending of the disciplines rather than everybody working in their separate...
Absolutely, and if we have multiple realities, well, why talk about it just in terms of these particles? That means you, Bernard, and myself have multiple versions of ourselves, and then the possibility starts to occur that we can actually communicate, literally,
that part
with
is
other
astounding.
versions of ourselves. So we can literally find out what you're doing in that other reality. And there are other realities where everything's different for you, and good and bad. And there are other realities where everything's different from me, good and bad. And you get to the point where you don't even think of them in terms of good or bad. You just think in terms of different. Because there's an infinite number of realities. So, if these Earth changes are really going to happen, then one thing is certain. Within a few months, we will know, and within a few months, the game of denial of whether the remote viewing phenomenon works will be over. So, it's actually very important for mainstream science to realize that we're really coming to a line in the sand, a time point in which the denial issue is going to be confronted no matter what. My feeling is that I really, really, really want mainstream science sooner rather than later to do, and that means some group with major participants making an announcement that the remote viewing phenomenon is real. I really want that to happen, because if these events do change, then there's going to be huge Earth changes, and there will be a reconstruction period afterwards. Now, in time periods that there have been major Earth changes or major social changes in the past, look what's happened. Think of the French Revolution. And remember, during the French Revolution, it spanned a period of about 10 years, although some French think the revolution never ended.
It never stopped,
But, it spanned a period of about 10 years, and you had the Reign of Terror, anarchy. And it really wasn't sort of stopped until Napoleon came along. And then when you had the collapse during the Depression, the economic collapse, look what came about. You had the chaos in Germany leading to Hitler. And then when the Soviet Union ran through its problems with the revolution in Russia, what did you have come out of that? You had Stalin. So my feeling is that if you're going to have severe Earth changes and severe disruption of the social systems, you're running the potential of anarchy afterwards. And anarchy usually ends with authoritarianism or totalitarianism. And so the idea of mainstream science acknowledging the reality of remote viewing now is important, because in the aftermath of severe Earth changes, we're going to have to rebuild. And what will happen if the entire planet says, first, that they don't trust the governmental leaders, but they always knew that the governmental leaders lied to them anyway, so that's not really new. But then they'll say, but we also don't trust mainstream science, because the mainstream scientists, some of them, a major component of them, knew this stuff was happening. Because all that anomalous behavior I mentioned before,
right,
with the Svalbard stuff, the shutting down of the space program, all that other stuff,
tunnel digging, right,
the NASA warnings, the masses will know that the scientists knew it and did nothing to do anything except cooperate with the government to save their own butts. And so what we're talking about is a situation in which the masses could turn away from all leadership, scientific as well as governmental. And if that happens, the rebuilding process would be horrific. It would be terrible. And I am a scientist. I love science. I want science to be a participant, the main leading light in the rebuilding process. And what chances do we have if the leadership is no longer credible to the masses? So some people have said, but Courtney, there'll still be you. You can still talk. But I'll be just one voice.
Yeah.
I'll be swept away with everybody else. So the point is that the mainstream leadership of the scientific community is needed in the future to be credible. And so the acknowledgement of the remote viewing phenomenon as real is so important for the future, so that people will then turn to the mainstream scientific community and say, you at least were honest with us, help us to rebuild a future that is grander, better than anything humanity has ever envisioned before. And that's what I want to participate in. I want to participate in the rebuilding of a planet that is bigger, better, a species with a destiny, so that when other civilizations elsewhere in the galaxy hear of us, they will hear of us in terms of the Earth legends that begin here now. And that everyone else in the galaxy will eventually say, if humans on Earth could do it, then anyone can do it. We can all do it. And so that's the type of future I see and want for humanity. And that's the type of future I want to participate in. So I really strongly encourage mainstream science to, leadership within the mainstream science to think about the far future, which is not very far.
Yeah.
Because in reality it's not, if the remote viewing data are accurate, the game is over in just some months. It's not something like they can postpone forever and get away with it. It's over. It's completely over, and it's going to be known regardless. If these changes happen, then the remote viewing was accurate, and the issue of whether remote viewing is real is over. It's done. And so there's really no cost to the mainstream establishment to acknowledge the reality of remote viewing, and there's a tremendous benefit for the future humanity to do that.
Well, and let me ask you one last question on this. Is remote viewing a skill or a talent? Can anybody do it?
It's like playing the piano. Anybody can play the piano, and if you study really hard playing the piano, you'll get good at it no matter what. However, there's that talent issue also. So it is true that it's a skill and anybody can do it, but there's also that talent in terms of the very best. So we don't really know how much talent is needed and how much skill is needed, but essentially anybody can be taught these procedures. Essentially, we didn't get into the quantum mechanical ideas behind it, concept of frequency, but the issue is essentially that these perceptions are actually within our range of perceptions constantly, but our mind is trained to screen them out. For example, the past, present, and future simultaneously exist, but you see only the here and now. Now, if you are out there in the wilderness and you come across a lion, you need to see that lion of today. You do not need to see the gazelle that was in that same spot yesterday. And you don't need to see the elephant that will be in that same spot tomorrow. What you need to see is the lion that's there today. So, if you're going to survive. So the brain has evolved to be what essentially is, and this is not an analogy, and essentially is a real thing, the brain has evolved to be a very narrow band hologram generator. So what it does is it selects out reality by screening out everything else, only of the here and now, and that reality is the only one it lets you see. It is exactly the same as what you get with a radio dial. When you're tuning into a station, the radio screens out all other signals that are up and down the wavelength, up and down the AM or the FM band or shortwave band, and you get only the station on that frequency. You don't get the other stations sort of blaring in on the same frequency. So the idea of selecting out a certain set of frequencies is very normal for us, and the brain is an extremely efficient, narrow band hologram generator. And so what remote viewers actually are, they are simply They are people who have studied to train the brain to loosen up a little bit. They've trained the mind to allow perceptions that are there but screened out. That's how remote viewing actually works. The perceptions are always there. In fact, you can always say that people have intuitive pulses. Well, these intuitive pulses are things that are in the person's awareness anyway, but occasionally are strong enough that they get through. Well, remote viewers are trained to see those things without waiting for an intuitive pulse. They're training to allow the brain to sort of loosen up and see these things that are already there for everybody. So yes, everybody can do that, but my own personal belief is that yes, talent does play a role, but if someone's really diligent in studying it like the piano, at some point in time you hear somebody who's maybe not very talented at the piano but who studied it ferociously, you hear them play the piano, you really can't tell the difference. They really sound awfully talented to you.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And they're playing the piano and they're doing all types of amazing things. Now, maybe some perfectionist would say, yeah, but they're not Carnegie Hall material. But you'd still listen to them and say, well, maybe you can see that, but as far as I'm concerned, that sounds like one of the most beautiful renditions of the Moonlight Sonata that I've ever heard. Do you get the idea?
Yeah, well, you may not be Itzhak Perlman, but you'll certainly be doing weddings and parties and making a living.
Exactly, exactly. That's sort of the way I view it.
Well, that's a really good analogy. Well, Courtney, I have kept you longer than I told you I would, but I really appreciate you talking to us. It's a fascinating topic.
It is a fascinating topic, and Bernard, I really am very appreciative of being able to be on your show. And also, I'm very interested, we're very international, I'm especially interested in getting information about the remote viewing phenomenon outside of the United States and Europe. I really like the idea of it coming out in places like Indonesia and elsewhere.
Well, you know, I call them the wet bots, you know, as opposed to Cliff High's web bots. But there is a long tradition of people here that are seers. Indonesians are very much into what they call magic. They flock to these people who are seers. Who do pretty much what you're doing, and not scientifically, of course, but, you know, they stare into vats of boiling liquid.
In their own intuitive way.
Sure, yeah. But, yeah, well, especially if anybody's listening and wants to send some information, why don't you give them your contact again? Yeah, actually, let's make sure they get this one. This is, the website is www.farsight, F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T, spelled like seeing far, Farsight. .org, because we're a nonprofit, O-R-G. And again, the best way to sort of get a capsule, there's tons of stuff on the website. I mean, it's a huge website. It's the biggest website you can possibly imagine. And all sorts of stuff is there, including a course in remote viewing called Scientific Remote Viewing that I developed. 18 hours, 24 lessons, free. It's a free printable text as well. It's hosted by YouTube, the lessons. But in addition to that, if you want if it's a bit overwhelming, you want to know what we're doing, the best way to go after it is to get the DVD, which is the Farsight Experiments, and it's right on our homepage. It's sold by Amazon, shipped internationally, easy. They ship DVDs everywhere. And that's the best way to... And it also has the definitive discussion of the 2012 climate project that we just been talking about. It's on the DVD. Well, and of course, all these links will be up with the videos, so people will be able to click immediately. Thank you very much. My head is spinning. I need to go take a break now. Yeah, that's great. Well, it's my pleasure, my honor, and I'm very grateful to be invited on your show. I also have my own personal website, which is just CourtneyBrown.com. So if people want to find out more about me, it's just my name.com. Well, and actually you have a lot of your materials are available through that site as well. Yeah, in fact, 2 early books that are now out of print, but were bestsellers in their day, called Cosmic Voyage and Cosmic Explorers. Those were remote viewing explorations into the extraterrestrial UFO phenomenon. Those are now available as free PDFs for download, and those can be found on my personal website. Oh, okay. Those are fun, and I've never backed away from them. So not only is the day coming when the Earth will be a different Earth with new and
brighter horizons after we perhaps get through these troubles. We're going to be facing a situation where we are interacting with a galaxy full of life. If you look at patterns of behavior, you can look at what happened with the Roswell incident in New Mexico where there was a crashed spaceship. What did the United States do? They immediately came out and said, it was a weather balloon, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. That became so difficult. Later on they said, okay, it was one of our experiments that we were planning and it crashed. Mm-hmm. and they said it was something else. People sort of, and the news dutifully reported each one of those things.
Yeah, and took it
seriously. Just a few weeks ago, Chase Brandon, who was the lead, one of the highest-ranking people in the CIA, he was the lead operative for like 27 years in Hollywood. All movies dealing with the CIA or extraterrestrial life went through Chase Brandon. He was not mentioned on the credits, but they all went through him. He made sure that the CIA was properly portrayed in all movies, including stuff dealing with extraterrestrial life. And he's like the biggest behind-the-scenes influencer in our mass media ever. And he came out just a couple of weeks ago in a Huffington Post article as well as on late night radio and said that Roswell definitely happened. It was a spaceship, a craft from another planet, from another place, and that the thing was real. So when you get, and the CIA has not denied that. So when you get stuff like that, you can see that the government is moving in the direction of disclosure, probably because they know some things are coming.
Well, and they know people like you out there that are kind of blowing the cover on everything.
Well, they know it's inevitable, and something that they also know is sort of getting closer, and they're preparing themselves for it. But so what you get is, if you take Chase Brandon at face value, and it's been printed in all sorts of mainstream news outlets at this point. Okay, there hasn't been an official government announcement with the President of the United States getting on major national television or something like that. Yeah. But nonetheless, when you get someone like Chase Brandon making those announcements, you realize that governments really do come up with these artificial stories to explain away these things for the longest time. So once you realize that is a pattern, then it really helps, not hurts. You don't get so angry with the government. What you actually do is you become free to interpret things and use your own mind. And that's what I encourage people to do with this post-2012 climate project, Earth Changes project, to just simply look at the data and make up your own mind. And similarly with the extraterrestrial stuff that I've done in my own personal hobby with the books Cosmic Voyage and Cosmic Explorers, I tell people just to read them and to make up their own mind.
I tell my children that all the time. But anyway, I will let you go, Courtney. I appreciate it very, very much. And I hope at some point in the future we can talk again, preferably before June 1st.
God bless, and absolutely.
Wow, this is fascinating stuff. Think about it. If the general population were trained in remote viewing, governments and other secretive organizations could no longer keep secrets from us. And if information is power, then this is empowering. Since the elite are using this technology, it behooves us to return the favor. The best part is, the next time someone catches you daydreaming, you can tell them, just practicing my remote viewing skills. Thanks for joining us, and be sure and check out the blog for links and other information related to this program. Also, if you're so moved, click on the PayPal donate button and show your appreciation. With that, we'll leave you with a little quote from Joe Gideon in All That Jazz. To be on the wire is life, everything else is waiting. Sampai jumpa.